What's up, guys? Dr. Jared Hall here, and today in this series we're going to be talking about a really common condition that not a lot of people actually know a ton about. It's the condition called adhesive capsulitis or frozen shoulder. So to give you a little bit of background on the condition, it's really not actually super well understood. It's a condition that happens usually after the age of about 40. It's more common in women, and it's dramatically more common in those people that have diabetes or metabolic conditions like hyperthyroidism. So we think that there's something about metabolic conditions that actually contribute to the likelihood of getting inflammation in your shoulder and leading to adhesive capsulitis. So to follow up, what we do know about adhesive capsulitis is that it's kind of a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning there's no special test, there's no blood test, there's no imaging that we can do that really actually shows adhesive capsulitis. One of the primary things that we'll do is get an x-ray of the shoulder to rule out advanced osteoarthritis of the shoulder, and then we kind of follow a clinical pattern recognition diagnosis of a certain pattern of limitation of shoulder range of motion. It's normally limited most in external rotation, followed by abduction, followed by flexion, followed by internal rotation. But that's certainly not how it always is. That's kind of just the traditional diagnostic classification. Also, a test that's really sensitive to figure out if it may or may not be adhesive capsulitis is to press right here on the coracoid process, and that's a little bone that sticks off the front of the shoulder blade, and that's often really tender in cases of adhesive capsulitis. So traditionally, adhesive capsulitis was thought to be a self-limiting condition that would resolve on its own, meaning that if you didn't really do anything, if you didn't get any treatment over the course of anywhere from 3 months all the way up to 18 months, it would probably just go away on its own. We felt like there was 3 stages: a freezing stage, a frozen stage, and a thawing stage, where it just naturally kind of thawed out and went away on its own. But in reality, there was some discrepancies in the literature that looked at that, and we've recently found out that we measured the data wrong, and adhesive capsulitis actually probably won't go away on its own without a lot of help from maybe some hands-on stretching and a lot of exercise to take that joint into the end range and really try to gain that range of motion back again. So if you've ever heard that it'll just go away on its own, don't believe that. We've actually figured out that it's a little bit more complex than that, and you do need some treatment to get back your full functional range of motion. So interestingly, we actually used to think that in adhesive capsulitis, there were a lot of little adhesions that developed in the shoulder that limited the range of motion, but there's really not a lot of compelling evidence that looks at this or confirms this. That was kind of just a theory put out that hasn't really been challenged, but most of the dissections of the shoulder have actually shown that there doesn't really seem to be the presence of these adhesions, and it's maybe much more of what's called a contracture of the glenohumeral joint around or the glenohumeral ligaments around the glenohumeral joint. So a contracture is when those tissues maybe tighten down or become less extensible due to an inflammatory process or a prolonged period of immobilization. So that's one of the reasons that it can take such a long time to get over this, because soft tissue does not stretch or change its structure very fast at all. So if you've gotten to a point where that soft tissue has shortened up and there's active inflammation in the joint, it can be very painful and it can be a very slow process to regain the full range of motion. So when dealing with adhesive capsulitis, it's really important to know that there's actually 2 main categories. You have primary, that actually just comes on its own, and we think that's more due to metabolic syndrome. And then you have secondary adhesive capsulitis, which is much more due to an injury to the shoulder that leads to inflammation and prolonged immobilization, which kind of sparks that process of the joint capsule actually tightening down or becoming less extensible. And then it gets a little bit more complicated because there's some good evidence that you can have both functional and maybe structural limitation of range of motion. So that structural limitation would be the tightening down of the capsule, but the functional limitation would actually be due to a protection mechanism driven by the nervous system to decrease the amount that the muscles in the body will actually let the shoulder go into that range of motion. So some exercise to functionally retrain the shoulder can actually be really beneficial for gaining range of motion rapidly. So it's really important to remember that if you've been diagnosed with adhesive capsulitis, that it is not a fast process to get over it, and you should set your goals kind of for the long term. You shouldn't let a healthcare provider trick you into coming 3 times a week, every week for a certain amount of time, because it is such a slow and long process. You should be given exercises that you do every day, multiple times a day, to actually go into stretching out that shoulder and regaining range of motion. And you should be touching back base with your healthcare provider to get updates to those exercises to progress you, but not a lot of hands-on care is necessarily really needed. This is a condition that should be independently managed with a ton of exercise outside of the clinic.
If you've ever had a rotator cuff issue, you've most likely seen this exercise where we externally rotate with a band. Now, I want to show you 3 other ways that you can use this band to get great results with the cuff. First one is an isometric walkout. For this one, all we do is hold our arms steady as we walk out, tensioning this band and getting more and more resistance on the cuff. Then we walk it back in. It's a great way to isometrically load it up. Next one is an eccentric only. So here we step in so there's no tension, externally rotate out, and then walk out to get our tension and just control our eccentric portion back in. Step in, retension, go back out and repeat. Last one is one of my favorite dynamic stabilization exercises. For this one, step out so you have just a little bit of tension and then punch up to the ceiling, keeping your elbow in line with your wrist. You're really gonna feel the cuff burn as you go back and forth. So try those out. There's 3 new ways that you can use that band to work the rotator cuff.
The Closed Kinetic Chain Upper Extremity Stability Test, or CKCUEST, was created in 2000 by Goldbeck and Davies as a way to measure athletes' dynamic shoulder stability and proprioception. It offers clinicians reliable and objective data to demonstrate progression during rehab of upper extremity injuries, as well as for return to play decision-making. There's even some evidence to show that the CKCUEST is associated with shoulder injury in football players. To perform the test, put 2 pieces of tape 36 inches apart and set up in a wide push-up position. Begin by taking your left hand and touching your right hand, and then take your right hand and touch your left hand. And then go back and forth, alternating touches as fast as possible for 15 seconds. The total score is the average from 2 to 3 trials with about a minute in between. A good score for the test is around 20 touches. Thanks for watching.
Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
What's up, guys? So today we're going to be talking about why I love using closed chain exercises for those dealing with some persistent pain with their shoulders. So it's not so much from a strengthening component, but I actually love to do it because what we're doing when we do closed chain shoulder exercises is flooding the brain with tons of awesome sensory info. What that can do is help to sharpen the cortical map, or that representation of our body within our brain. So here's a couple of the exercises that I love to use for starters.
So we got cat camels first, which are a great way to start as an introduction for getting some awareness through the shoulder joint, okay? Next thing we're gonna do are some bear crawl iso holds, screw into the floor, actively push away, and then you can dose isometrics accordingly. The last one that I'll use is a nice little scap clock. Fix that one arm in, and then we're actively pushing in, flooding that brain with awesome sensory info. Hope this stuff helps, guys.
All right, going over proper upper body mechanics during the push-up and the dumbbell bench press, specifically looking at the elbow alignment during both motions. First, starting with the push-up. It's super important to preset the shoulder in a proper position via spreading the floor apart. Here's how it looks. If I don't preset the shoulder in a proper position via spreading the floor apart, my elbows will flare out like this in this position. Now, if I preset it by externally rotating the shoulders by trying to spread the floor apart, my elbows will naturally go straight backwards in more of a 45-degree alignment, which will look like an arrow position from the top view. All right, now looking at the dumbbell bench press. If I'm here and I flare it out to 90 degrees, you can see my elbows will flare out throughout the motion and I look like a T from above. Versus if I start here and I only open up 45 degrees, my elbows will naturally fall to the side in more of a 45-degree angle, and from the top I could look like an arrow.
All right, guys, we're going to look at a couple things here. So we're going to start with a shoulder packing teaching drill to gain some awareness in the rib cage, the trunk, and the shoulder here. And notice how I'm holding the kettlebell in all of these pressing variations with an overhand grip, knuckles facing toward the ceiling without using that broken wrist where that wrist kind of hangs off to the side. So really be cognizant of that. After the floor drills, we're going to 2 developmental positions, the half nail, then the tall nail. Notice how my hand is cueing my rib cage to remain down and stacked and avoiding an excessive rib cage flare here and letting the shoulder do its thing while it presses overhead. And lastly, we're going to go into a standing one-arm press variation. So again, I have that hand in the rib cage to cue rib cage down, no rib cage flare, and I'm pressing nice and controlled overhead with that good grip on the kettlebell.